The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized. Her lips curved into a practiced smile, her eyes lined carefully with mascara, her hair falling in soft curls that my stylist insisted looked romantic. But behind the gloss and shimmer, I could see it. That quiet flicker of doubt, the kind that whispers when you're alone, asking questions you don't want to answer. I was supposed to be the happiest version of myself. Every magazine headline, every dreamy bridal Pinterest board had promised this season of my life would feel like floating in champagne bubbles, light, sparkling, unforgettable. Yet, as I sat in the fitting room of the bridal boutique, swathed in white satin, I felt more like an imposter in someone else's fairy tale. "You look nice," my mother said from behind me. "Nice. Not breathtaking, not radiant, just nice." She didn't even glance up from her phone as she said it. Her thumbs tapped a steady rhythm, scrolling through what I could only assume were updates from my sister Rachel. Because lately, it was always Rachel. "Thanks," I murmured, trying not to let the word sink its claws into me. The consultant, sensing the chill in the room, clapped her hands together. "Why don't we try this with a veil? Sometimes that really completes the look." I nodded, even though I felt like a mannequin waiting to be dressed up for someone else's approval. When the veil was draped over me, I forced myself to imagine it. The aisle, the music, my fiancé's face when he saw me. James. If there was one steady thing in all of this chaos, it was him. He loved me with a steadiness I didn't know how to trust at first. He made me laugh when my chest was too tight to breathe, and he whispered promises that felt more real than any vow written in a book. Still, a lump rose in my throat. Because what good was being a bride if your own family couldn't be bothered to look at you? I turned, hoping for a glimpse of pride in my mother's eyes. Instead, she was already on a call, laughing at something Rachel had said on the other end. And that's when it hit me. I could already see the outline of my wedding day, not as the celebration I dreamed of since I was a little girl, but as another stage where my sister would steal the spotlight and I'd be left in the wings clapping politely for her performance. For the first time since James slipped that ring onto my finger, the thought crossed my mind, sharp and uninvited. What if my wedding isn't about me at all? Rachel didn't even have to try. That was the most maddening part. She could walk into a room in sweatpants, hair piled in a messy bun, and somehow everyone would turn their heads. My mother would light up, my father's posture would straighten, and even distant relatives would gush about how she had that spark. And she did, I'll give her that. Rachel was dazzling in a way that seemed effortless, the kind of girl who collected admirers like seashells. She could charm a stranger in the grocery store line, or convince our father to hand her his credit card with a tilt of her head. Growing up, I learned quickly that I was the other daughter, not the pretty one, not the favorite one, just the placeholder. If Rachel was the sun, I was the shadow that stretched behind her, always present but rarely noticed. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. When Rachel graduated college, the entire extended family flew in for a weekend-long celebration, complete with banners, catered food, and a slideshow of her greatest moments. When I graduated, we had pizza on paper plates in the living room, my diploma shoved into a drawer before the cheese had even cooled. I thought maybe things would change when James proposed. After all, a wedding is a milestone no one can ignore. Surely, finally, this would be the moment I stood in the center of my own story. But the illusion shattered quickly. "I don't know why you'd pick blush bridesmaids' dresses," Rachel said the night I invited her over to help with planning. She lounged across my couch like she owned the place, swirling her wine glass with deliberate grace. "Blush washes me out. You know pink isn't my color." I blinked. "It's not really about you, Rachel. It's my wedding." She laughed, that airy, dismissive sound that always made me feel small. "Of course it's about you. I just think you should pick a shade that flatters everyone. Don't you want the pictures to look perfect?" The worst part wasn't that she said it. It was that my mother, who had been half listening from the armchair, nodded in agreement. Rachel has a point. Maybe something in Navy? That would really make Rachel's eyes pop. My eyes stung, though I hid it with a smile. I'll think about it. And just like that, a detail I had imagined since I was 12 years old, my bridesmaids in soft blush, carrying white roses, was discarded, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it wasn't beautiful for Rachel. It went on like that for weeks. The cake flavor, the playlist, even the seating chart, all filtered through the lens of how it would make Rachel feel, how it would look for Rachel, how Rachel might take it. Your sister should be maid of honor, don't you think? My father said one evening at dinner. It's only right. She has the personality for it. I stared down at my plate, my appetite gone. My best friend, Natalie, had been at my side since freshman year of college. She knew me better than anyone, had cried with me through breakups, and screamed with me through victories. She was supposed to stand beside me. But now, even that seemed negotiable, as long as it pleased Rachel. It was always Rachel. Sometimes I wondered if my family realized how transparent they were, how every word and decision confirmed what I'd felt my whole life, that I was loved but not admired, valued but not cherished, chosen only when Rachel wasn't an option. And deep down, I feared that no matter how white my gown, no matter how pure my vows, my wedding day would only be another chapter in Rachel's story, while mine was just a footnote. The night James proposed still shimmered in my memory like starlight trapped in a jar. It was simple. No choreographed flash mob, no glittering rooftop dinner, no over-the-top spectacle that would have suited Rachel's taste. Instead, it was just us on a quiet pier, the water lapping against the wood as the city lights flickered across the surface. He held my hands, his eyes steady and earnest. "I don't need a perfect moment," he whispered. "Just the right person." And then he knelt. My heart had thudded so loudly in my ears I barely heard the words. Only the trembling joy in his voice and the sparkle of the ring as he slid it onto my finger. That night, I'd felt like the world finally belonged to me. But by morning, reality returned. I walked into my parents' house, bursting with news, only to find my mother already on the phone with Rachel. "Mom," I said breathless, holding up my hand so the diamond caught the light. "James asked me last night." Her eyes flicked to the ring. "Oh, that's nice." She reached for her mug of coffee, her voice barely lifting. "Rachel, you'll never guess. Your sister's engaged." She held the phone out to me. "Here, tell her." Rachel's voice filled my ear, warm but laced with something I couldn't name. "Wow, congratulations. That's so exciting. Send me a picture of the ring. I'll tell you if it's too big or too small for your hand." "Too big? Too small?" I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. Later, when James asked how my family reacted, I forced a smile. They're happy for us. But the truth was, their enthusiasm felt muted, like clapping at the wrong time in a performance, hesitant, almost obligatory. The only one who seemed genuinely thrilled was my father. "Well, James is a good man," he said, patting my shoulder. "If anyone can put up with this family, it's him." He chuckled, but his words carried an edge, as though he already knew how the story would unfold. Sue. In the weeks that followed, I clung to James's excitement like a lifeline. He wanted to talk about the guest list, the honeymoon, the vows. His joy was so unshakable it kept me from collapsing under the weight of my family's indifference. Still, a small part of me longed for the kind of celebration Rachel would have received. Balloons, champagne toasts, squeals of delight, an endless flood of admiration. Instead, when I announced the engagement to my extended family, the responses were lukewarm at best. "That's wonderful, dear," my aunt said, before immediately turning to Rachel. "And how's your job search going, sweetheart?" as if my engagement was just a footnote in Rachel's story. The glow of being engaged was real, but it was dimmed by the shadows of everyone else's expectations. I found myself caught between two truths: the private joy James and I built together, and the public disappointment of realizing that, in my family's eyes, even my happiest moments were never entirely mine. But James would squeeze my hand, kiss my temple, and whisper, "They don't matter. This is our beginning." And for a little while, I believed him. If engagements are supposed to be a season of joy, mine quickly turned into a battlefield. Not between James and me. We were united, firm in what we wanted, but between us and my family, or more accurately, between me and Rachel, with my parents acting as her ever-loyal generals. The first skirmish broke out over the venue. James and I had fallen in love with a charming garden tucked behind an old estate on the edge of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it felt like us. Quiet, intimate, with ivy climbing stone walls and lanterns that glowed softly at night. I pictured walking down the aisle with the scent of roses and lavender in the air, the evening sun painting everything gold. But the moment I showed my family pictures, Rachel wrinkled her nose. "It's cute," she said, "but don't you think it's a little small? What if people feel cramped? You want something grand. Imagine the photos at a ballroom or a country club. So elegant." Mom nodded instantly, her voice firm. "Rachel's right. Weddings are about appearances. You don't want people thinking you settled." Settled. The word landed heavy in my stomach, as though my happiness was somehow second-rate. James spoke up gently. "We like the garden because it feels personal, not because it's flashy." But my mother dismissed him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, it's not my decision, but I'd hate for you two to regret it later." Regret. Another seed of doubt planted. The battles only escalated from there. Flowers, colors, food. I dreamed of soft blues and whites, but Rachel lobbied for blush pinks. "You'll thank me," she insisted, spreading magazines across the dining table. "Pink photographs beautifully." "I'm not asking for photographs," I muttered. "I'm asking for a wedding that feels like mine." Rachel didn't even flinch. "A wedding is about what everyone else remembers. Trust me, you don't want it to look cheap." The word stung like a slap. Cheap. Dad stayed silent most of the time, sipping his coffee as if the details didn't matter to him. But when he did speak, it was usually to echo my mother. "Your mom has a good eye for these things," he'd say, effectively closing the door on any protest. One night, after another exhausting discussion about the seating chart, I sat in James's car with tears streaming down my face. "Why is it always like this?" I whispered. "Why can't they just let me have this one thing?" James brushed my cheek with his thumb, his voice calm but fierce. "Because they don't see you the way I do. But this is your wedding, not theirs. Don't let them steal it from you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the louder Rachel's opinions became, the quieter my own voice seemed to grow. By the time we sent out invitations, I could already feel the truth clawing at the edges of my joy. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a war for control. And I was losing ground, one decision at a time. If Rachel was the sun in our family's sky, then my mother was the planet that orbited closest to her light. Growing up, I used to think maybe I'd done something wrong to deserve her coolness. Some daughters get mothers who dote on them, who press kisses into their hair and call them their mini-me. I got a mother who corrected my posture at age 7, who tugged at my clothes and sighed, "Why don't you try to be more like Rachel?" The truth was, I'd never been enough for her. Not pretty enough, not charming enough, not radiant enough. But Rachel? She was always enough. And more. The older I got, the sharper the contrast became. Rachel's milestones were celebrated with fanfare. Her first job out of college came with a dinner party, a banner, even champagne. My first promotion? A lukewarm "good for you" over the phone. So, When the wedding planning began, I should have expected where my mother's loyalties would fall. Still, it hurt. One evening, I came over with swatches of fabric for the bridesmaid dresses, excited to finally include her in a choice I had made on my own. I spread them out on the kitchen counter, soft slate blue, dusty lilac, ivory champagne. I thought these would look really beautiful against the garden backdrop, I explained, almost shyly, especially in photos. Rachel walked in mid-sentence, eyeing the colors with a raised brow. She plucked the lilac swatch between two fingers. This makes people look washed out. Honestly, I think emerald green would be striking. My mother leaned over, instantly nodding. Oh yes, green is powerful. Blue and lilac feel dreary. I swallowed. But I already ordered the dresses. Cancel them, Mom said without hesitation. It's better to fix it now than regret it later. Her words cut deeper than she realized. Regret. That same word she always wielded like a weapon. It was never about trusting my choices, only about preventing me from making what she considered mistakes. James, who had come with me that evening, finally spoke up. They're her dresses. Her wedding. Maybe we should trust her instincts. My mother's gaze flicked to him, her lips pressing into a thin smile. Of course, James. But she's young. Sometimes she doesn't see the bigger picture. Young. As though I were still a child, fumbling in the dark, incapable of making decisions for my own life. I tried to laugh it off, but that night when James and I left, I gripped his hand so tightly, my knuckles ached. I don't know why I thought it would be different, I whispered as the porch light faded behind us. She's never on my side. James kissed my temple softly. You don't need her side. You just need yours. And mine. I wanted to believe him, but there was an emptiness inside me that only a mother's approval could fill. And every time she withheld it, the hollow space seemed to grow wider. I told myself it was just wedding stress. Just her way of trying to help. But deep down, I knew the truth. My mother had always been Rachel's shadow, and by extension, I had always been hers. And shadows have a way of swallowing the light. If my mother's weapon was criticism, my father's was silence. He wasn't cruel. Not in the way my mother could be, with her sharp remarks dressed up as advice. Dad was gentler, softer, but he had a way of disappearing even when he was sitting right in front of you. He would sink into his chair with a cup of coffee, nodding occasionally, as though agreeing was easier than taking a stand. As a child, I used to think of him as my safe place. He didn't demand perfection. He didn't compare me to Rachel. When I brought home drawings from school, he'd ruffle my hair and say, "Looks great, kiddo." Simple, warm. I lived for those moments. But as I grew older, I realized that my father's approval was only ever passive. He never raised his voice when my mother scolded me for not being enough. He never defended me when Rachel claimed my space, my time, my accomplishments. He just sat there, quiet, sipping his coffee, letting the storm pass. It was the same with the wedding. One Saturday evening, James and I came over to discuss logistics. We were finalizing the menu, and I wanted to keep it simple. Roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables, a choice of pasta for vegetarians. Comfort food, nothing extravagant. But Rachel wrinkled her nose. That's so boring. People expect something exciting. Filet mignon, maybe a seafood option. You don't want your guests to feel like they're at a cafeteria. I laughed nervously. It's not a cafeteria, Rachel. It's just us. We want the food to feel warm, like home. Mom chimed in, siding with Rachel instantly. Your sister's right. Chicken feels cheap for a wedding. There it was again. That word. Cheap. I turned to Dad, desperate for backup. He had been quiet all evening, staring at his coffee mug as though the swirls of steam held the answers to all of life's problems. Dad, I said carefully, what do you think? He shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking from me to Rachel to Mom. Then he cleared his throat. Well, Your mom has a point. People do remember the food. I felt the sting before the words had even finished leaving his mouth. Not because he had agreed with them, but because he had chosen not to agree with me. Again. James must have felt the tension because he placed a protective hand over mine. "It's our wedding," he said firmly. "We'll choose what feels right for us." My dad looked down into his coffee and said nothing more. The silence roared louder than words ever could. Later that night, as James drove us home, I stared out the window, my chest tight. "I don't understand," I whispered. "It's not even about the food. It's about the fact that he never, ever chooses me. He just lets them decide everything." James's jaw tightened as he kept his eyes on the road. Maybe he doesn't know how. Some people think silence is safer than taking a side. I let out a hollow laugh. Safer for him, maybe, but not for me. The truth was, my father's silence had shaped me more than I wanted to admit. It had taught me that my voice could be ignored, that my needs could be brushed aside, that I would always be second to the person who shone brighter in their eyes. And as the wedding drew closer, his silence grew heavier, pressing down on me like a stone I couldn't lift. The first true fight with Rachel came 3 weeks before the wedding. It started innocently enough, with a disagreement about the music. James and I had chosen a local quartet who played a mix of classical and modern arrangements. I love the way they made even pop songs sound timeless, as if our wedding were wrapped in a layer of magic. But Rachel, of course, had other ideas. "You can't seriously walk down the aisle to a string version of Coldplay," she said, lounging across Mom's couch with her phone in hand. "That's tacky. You need something grand, traditional, Wagner's Bridal Chorus. That's what people expect." "It's what I want," I said firmly, folding my arms. Rachel smirked, the way she always did when she thought she was right. "You'll regret it when people snicker under their breath. Trust me, I know these things." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Not everything has to be about appearances, Rachel. This is my wedding." That was when Mom stepped in, her voice cool. "Don't raise your voice. Rachel's only trying to help. She has a good eye for these things." Something inside me snapped. "Help," I spat. "She's taken over everything. The flowers, the food, the colors. Every time I make a choice, she swoops in and tells me it's wrong. And you always side with her. Always." The room went quiet. Even Dad, who sat in his recliner with a newspaper, looked up with surprise. Rachel tilted her head, her smile widening like she'd been waiting for this moment. "You're overreacting. Honestly, you sound jealous." The word hit like a slap. "Jealous?" My voice shook, but I refused to back down. "You've stolen the spotlight my whole life. Every time I try to have something of my own, you make it yours. I'm not jealous, Rachel. I'm exhausted." Her smirk faltered for the briefest second before she recovered. "I'm just saying what everyone else is too polite to say. You don't want to embarrass yourself. I'm trying to protect you." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "You're trying to make this about you. Like always." Silence hung heavy in the room. Finally, Dad folded his newspaper, his voice calm but stern. "Enough. This is supposed to be a happy time. Let's not turn it into a fight." But it already was a fight, one I'd been losing for years. I grabbed my bag, blinking back tears. "I can't do this anymore." James was at my side in an instant, his hand at the small of my back as he guided me toward the door. As we left, Rachel called after me, her tone dripping with sweetness. "You'll thank me later." I slammed the door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. In the car, I buried my face in my hands. "She's going to ruin my wedding. I can feel it." James pulled me into his arms, his voice steady. "She can only ruin it if you let her. This isn't Rachel's day. It's ours. And I won't let anyone steal that from you." I wanted to believe him. But deep down, a gnawing fear twisted in my chest. Because if history had taught me anything, it was this. When it came to Rachel, somehow she always won. After the fight with Rachel, I began noticing something I had ignored for years. There were people outside my family who actually saw me. It started small. Text messages from close friends checking in. "Hey, how's the wedding chaos going? You okay?" Or, "If you need to vent, I'm here. Always." I had brushed off these messages in the past, too busy worrying about what my family thought to lean on anyone else. But now, I was desperate. The first one to truly help was my childhood friend Lena. She had been my confidant through awkward teenage years, heartbreaks, and late-night study sessions. When I called her after the fight with Rachel, her voice was calm, grounding. "You're allowed to be upset," she said gently, "and you're allowed to put boundaries. This is your wedding. Don't let them take it from you." Her words felt revolutionary. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't powerless, just conditioned to believe I was. Then, there was a stranger who began to appear in the background of my life, subtle at first. I met him briefly at the boutique when I was measuring the final alterations on my dress. He was helping the stylist set up fabric samples. A quiet, unassuming man with a kind smile. He offered a simple compliment. "That dress really suits you. You look happy in it." The words were so ordinary, yet they pierced the heaviness I carried. For years, I'd been starved for approval, for recognition that I mattered. Not to Rachel, not to Mom, not even to Dad, but here was someone who noticed me without agenda or expectation. Over the next few weeks, I ran into him occasionally. At the florist, the bakery, even at a small cafe where I tried to escape wedding madness. Each time, he offered a small kindness, a warm smile, a word of encouragement. I didn't know his name, and I didn't yet know how much he would matter. But the feeling he sparked in me was undeniable. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find support outside the family I had relied on my whole life. James noticed it too. "You've got a support system," he said one evening, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You don't have to carry this alone." I nodded, but the truth was, I had carried it alone for so long that letting anyone in felt strange, almost dangerous. And yet, even in my fear, I sensed something shifting. For the first time in months, maybe years, I began to believe that I didn't have to fight this war by myself. Maybe help could come from unexpected places. Little did I know, the stranger who had offered that quiet smile at the boutique would soon play a role that none of us could have predicted, a role that would change everything I thought I knew about love, family, and my own strength. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of nerves, fabric, and whispered arguments. Each morning, I woke with a tightness in my chest, a reminder that the day I had dreamed about since childhood was almost here, and yet I didn't feel joy. Every interaction with my family seemed to carry an unspoken tension. My mother critiqued the placement of table settings. Rachel commented on aisle decorations, the bridesmaid's hair, the order of the ceremony. Even Dad, usually silent, offered the occasional muttered remark about how tradition matters. Every comment chipped away at the little confidence I had left. James did his best to shield me, reminding me that this was our day, not theirs. But as much as I loved him, the anxiety that had been growing for weeks couldn't be soothed entirely by reassurance. At work, my friends noticed the change. Lena called me one evening, practically shouting over the phone, "You need to breathe! This wedding isn't worth losing your mind! Don't let them win!" I laughed, the sound hollow. It's not just them. I don't know why, but I can't shake this feeling that everything is going to go wrong. "Because they'll try," Lena replied firmly. "But you have James and you have me, and there's someone else, someone you've barely met, who might just remind you that life doesn't have to be ruled by your family's drama." Her words lingered in my mind long after we hung up. I thought of the stranger from the boutique, the man who had smiled at me without expectation, the one who had made me feel seen when nobody else did. A flicker of hope ignited inside me. though I barely understood why. As the wedding day approached, the chaos reached a fever pitch. Final dress fittings turned into silent battles as Rachel and Mom criticized each choice, offering endless alternatives. Invitations that had once been a source of excitement became another arena for control. I began to feel as though I were drowning, trapped in a tide of opinions that weren't my own. On the night before the wedding, I sat alone in my room, staring at the dress hanging from the armoire. Its ivory satin shimmered softly in the lamplight, beautiful and untouched by the tension around it. I traced my fingers along the delicate lace and whispered into the quiet room, "I don't want to cry tomorrow. I just want to be happy." A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, James was there, holding a small bouquet of lilies, the flowers I had originally chosen. He smiled softly. "I know things have been hard," he said, "but tomorrow is about you. I promise, no one can take this moment from you." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes, but not allowing them to fall. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in days, I felt a small sense of peace. Yet, even in that calm, I couldn't shake the premonition that the next day would bring more than just joy. The presence of my family, particularly Rachel, loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. I had to brace myself for the possibility that the wedding might not unfold as I had imagined. Little did I know, the stranger who had quietly observed from the sidelines was about to step into my life in a way that would change everything. The person who had, in small gestures, reminded me that I was worthy of attention and care was about to show me a path through the chaos I could no longer navigate alone. Tomorrow, the world would watch, and I would have to decide, succumb to the shadow of my family, or step into the light that I'd been too afraid to claim. The night before my wedding, silence wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. The house, usually bustling with chatter and clinking dishes, seemed to have been emptied of warmth. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ivory dress hanging in the soft glow of my bedside lamp, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything. Tears slid down my cheeks, warm and unrelenting. Not for James, not yet, but for the family I had always hoped would cheer the loudest, the ones whose approval I had craved since childhood. My mother's critiques, my father's quiet avoidance, Rachel's constant overshadowing, they all pressed in on me, and suddenly, the excitement I had imagined for this day felt like a cruel joke. I reached for my phone and scrolled through the supportive messages from friends. Lena had texted hours ago. "Breathe. You are allowed to cry. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to own this day." I read it over and over, clinging to the words like a lifeline. A soft knock at my door startled me. I wiped my tears quickly, hoping no one had seen. "Hey," James said, stepping inside with that calm, unwavering smile I had come to rely on. In his hand was a small tray with 2 mugs of tea. "Thought you might need this." I managed a shaky smile, taking the mug. "I don't even know if I can be happy tomorrow," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He sat beside me on the bed and took my hand in his. "Then cry tonight," he said. "Let it out. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we start fresh. This day is ours. Don't let anyone steal it from you." His words settled over me, a soft promise against the storm raging inside my chest. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somehow, despite the years of being overlooked, despite Rachel's presence, despite my parents' favoritism, I could still claim my moment of happiness. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. Cleansing, raw, honest. I mourned the family support I would never fully receive, the childhood dreams that had been overshadowed, the hope that one day they would truly see me. And then, as if answering an unspoken prayer, I remembered the stranger, the quiet man who had offered me a smile without expectation, who had reminded me that I mattered even when my family didn't acknowledge it. His kindness, so small yet so profound, began to feel like a lifeline, I didn't know his name. I didn't know what his intentions were. But in that moment, I understood something I hadn't admitted to myself. I didn't have to wait for my family to validate me. There were people out there, friends, strangers, even James, who could see me, who could hold me, who could remind me of my worth. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow wouldn't be the day I cried alone. I took a deep breath, resting my head against the pillows, and whispered to the quiet room, "I will survive this. I will be happy. Somehow, I will be happy." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of anticipation. The wedding was only hours away, and the future, uncertain, terrifying, and exhilarating, waited. Little did I know that by morning, everything I had known about family, loyalty, and love would be challenged in ways I could never have imagined, and that a stranger, who had so far only appeared in fleeting moments, would soon become the catalyst for a transformation I didn't yet understand. Tomorrow, the world would witness a celebration, but for me, it would also be the beginning of a reckoning, one that would change my life forever. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, as if the world itself was trying to promise me a perfect day. But perfection was the last thing I felt. I sat on the edge of the bed, the ivory satin of my gown folded carefully beside me, and tried to steady my trembling hands. The room smelled faintly of lilies, the same ones James had brought me the night before, yet their fragrance did little to calm the storm inside me. "Breathe," James murmured, sitting beside me. His hands were warm, grounding, anchoring me to the present. "This is your day, ours. You can do this." I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. I keep imagining everyone staring, everyone judging, especially Rachel. James pressed his lips to my forehead. "Let them. You're walking toward me, and that's all that matters." Still, the thought of my family's disapproval clung to me like a shadow. My mother had already sent a long list of instructions for the morning preparations: how my hair should be pinned, how my makeup should be just perfect, how the bridesmaids should look like they belong in a magazine, not a garden party. And Rachel, of course, had added her own commentary, critiquing every tiny detail I had chosen. The room outside my sanctuary was bustling. Hairdressers and makeup artists moved with practiced efficiency, talking in soft tones. Bridesmaids adjusted their dresses, laughed nervously, and whispered words of encouragement. But beneath the hum of preparation, I could feel tension coiling tighter and tighter. A knock at the door made me start. "Ready?" James's voice sounded through the frame. I took a deep breath and nodded, standing slowly. As I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. The gown flowed around me like liquid light, the veil delicately framing my face. I was beautiful, but the reflection also revealed the worry etched in my eyes, the weight of a family that hadn't celebrated me the way I deserved. The first challenge came with the bridal party. Rachel had positioned herself at the perfect vantage point to make every movement about her. As I walked down the hall to the living room, she caught my eye and gave me a smug smile that made my stomach churn. "You look nice," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "I guess the veil helps." I bit my tongue, refusing to answer. Instead, I focused on James waiting at the end of the aisle, the only person whose gaze I wanted to meet. Even as the limousine pulled up, ready to take me to the garden where our ceremony would unfold, my heart thudded with a mix of excitement and dread. Outside, guests began arriving. The garden transformed into a vision of soft pastels and twinkling lanterns. But no matter how beautiful the setting, the thought of my family, judging, criticizing, and overshadowing me, made it impossible to feel entirely at ease. And yet, amid the nerves, a small, persistent flicker of hope remained. The stranger, the one whose fleeting kindness had reminded me I was worthy, lingered in my mind, an anchor in the storm. I didn't know what role he would play yet, but for the first time in years, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely alone. The day had begun, and there was no turning back. Tomorrow's chapter would not just be about a wedding. It would be about confrontation, revelation, and the moment when I had to decide whose voices mattered most in my life, my family's or my own. The garden was breathtaking. Lanterns twinkled like captured stars, flowers spilled over trellises in soft pastel cascades, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses and lavender. Guests murmured in anticipation as soft string music filled the air. In any other moment, I might have felt enchanted. But today, my heart felt like a fragile bird trapped in a storm. I stepped out of the limousine, the ivory gown brushing softly against the stone path. My hands trembled as I clutched the bouquet James had insisted I carry. White lilies, carefully chosen months ago, now my silent rebellion against the chaos that had defined these weeks. And then I saw them. My family. Or what passed for family in that moment. Mom was seated in the front row, her posture impeccable, but her eyes, they weren't on me. They were on Rachel. She sat with a serene smile, perfectly angled in the light, as if she were the bride herself. The realization hit me like ice water. In their eyes, Rachel had stolen the spotlight again. The moment I had waited for my entire life was already being hijacked. I froze for a heartbeat. The music continued, the world moved forward, but I felt suspended in disbelief. James caught my hand, his eyes warm and steady. It's our day. Breathe. Focus on me. I nodded, forcing one foot in front of the other. Each step down the aisle was a mixture of courage and dread. Guests smiled politely, some whispering congratulations, others staring as if they could sense the tension radiating from the front row. And then it happened. As I approached the altar, my mother leaned slightly toward Rachel, whispering something that made her laugh softly. I couldn't hear the words, but the gesture was a dagger. My heart clenched. Rachel caught my eye briefly and smirked, just a fraction, but enough to shatter me. She didn't even need to speak. The expression said it all. I win. You will always be second. The officiant began speaking, their voice a distant echo behind the pounding of my own heart. I tried to focus on James, on the warmth of his hand, the steady reassurance in his gaze. But the scene before me, the family I had longed to feel celebrated by, was a cruel mirror of everything I had feared. Tears pricked my eyes. I blinked rapidly, hoping no one noticed. My veil hid most of my face, but it couldn't hide the ache in my chest. I had imagined this moment countless times, walking toward the love of my life, enveloped in joy, embraced by family who cheered my happiness. Instead, I felt invisible. James squeezed my hand gently. You're beautiful, he whispered. Don't let them steal this from you. I swallowed hard, nodding, my throat tight. I wanted to believe him, but the world around me whispered differently. Every smile my mother offered Rachel, every approving nod toward my sister, felt like a verdict. My wedding day, the day I was supposed to shine, was already being rewritten in Rachel's favor. And yet, through the haze of hurt and betrayal, a tiny flicker of something unexpected stirred in my mind. The stranger. The quiet man whose small gestures had reminded me that I was seen. If he were here now, maybe he would help me remember that my worth wasn't defined by their applause. The ceremony continued, words flowing over me like distant waves. I clung to James, to the love that had been my anchor, and deep down, a stubborn ember of defiance began to glow. No matter what my family thought, no matter how Rachel tried to claim my moment, I would survive this. I would not crumble entirely. But as the vows drew near, I couldn't help but wonder, would the rest of the day break me completely? Or would it bring someone entirely unexpected to my side, ready to change everything?